The hall is already loud before the first chord lands. Not anticipation, restlessness. Glasses clink. People talk over the stage lights warming up. This isn't a prison. It isn't his crowd. It's a city that thinks Johnny Cash is too dark, too slow, too heavy for a night meant to feel easy. The opening notes fall, bare, unprotected. A whistle cuts through from the balcony. Then laughter. Someone shouts the title of a pop song that has nothing to do with him. It's the sound every artist dreads. Not anger, but dismissal. Backstage, someone lifts a hand, ready to pull him off before it gets worse. But Johnny doesn't react. He doesn't talk back, doesn't stop the song, doesn't speed it up to please them. He does nothing at all. And in that refusal, quiet, deliberate, almost weary, something begins to shift. Because when a man keeps singing exactly as he is while a room tries to erase him, the noise loses its power. This is the night the audience expects him to fail. It's also the night the hall starts breaking, without realizing why. Let us know where you're watching from, and we hope you enjoy the story. The stage lights came up too early for him. It wasn't a mistake, just bad placement. Late 60s, a sprawling city concert built for contrast. Bright pop acts, loud rock bands, easy laughter, people drifting in and out with plastic cups in their hands. Johnny Cash was slotted between two performers whose songs had choruses you could hum without listening. He stood backstage long enough to hear one of them finish to cheers that felt light, disposable. No one backstage said it out loud, but everyone knew. This wasn't his crowd. From the wings, he scanned the audience. Not hostile. Worse. Disinterested. Some people were seated but leaning back, arms crossed. Others stood in loose knots, talking over the music, drinks tilted dangerously close to the edge. A few faces were turned toward the stage with an expression that said they were waiting for something to be over. Not angry, just impatient. An organizer hovered near the monitors, jaw tight. Cash's name had caused a small argument earlier that day. His songs were too heavy, someone had said. Guilt, faith, prisons, wrong temperature for a summer night meant to feel carefree. They hadn't pulled him, but they'd moved him. A safer compromise, they'd decided. Cash stepped out anyway. No announcement lingered on his reputation. No build-up. Just his name, briefly, and the expectation that he would deliver something familiar enough not to disrupt the mood. He adjusted the guitar strap without looking up. The microphone caught a dry click when he tested it. No warmth, no echo. His voice would land exactly as it was, naked, with nowhere to hide. He noticed it immediately. Some singers would have asked for an adjustment. He didn't. He leaned in once, then stepped back half an inch, measuring the distance like a man testing thin ice. When he spoke, even that small movement mattered. Every breath carried. He chose the opening song deliberately, and not the one they wanted. It was slow, sparse, dark around the edges, no friendly rhythm to ease into it. The first line fell into the open air and didn't bounce back, softened. It just sat there. A few people shifted. Someone laughed too loudly at something unrelated. The band came in quietly, cautious, as if they already sensed the resistance moving through the crowd like a draft. The first whistle cut through before the chorus had a chance to arrive. It wasn't sharp or furious, just casual. The sound of someone bored enough to make noise. Cash kept his eyes down. He'd heard worse. Always had. Still, the body registers it before the mind does. A tightening in the chest. A memory flickering where it doesn't belong. He sang on, slower than before, as if daring the song to stand on its own legs. The microphone did him no favors. Every pause was audible, every swallow. When he reached the space before the second verse, he stopped. Not a dramatic stop, just a pause. The band hesitated, fingers hovering. In the silence, the audience became aware of itself. The scrape of a shoe, a cough, the low clink of plastic. No one knew if this was part of the song or the beginning of an exit. Cash lifted his head slightly. For a brief moment, the rejection wasn't loud at all. It was simply there, settled, expectant, waiting to see whether he would retreat or continue standing exactly where he was. The pause didn't calm the room. It gave it permission. The first whistle had been almost playful. What followed wasn't. Sounds began to stack, short bursts, uneven, coming from different corners. Someone shouted for something faster. Another voice, closer to the front, asked if he knew any songs people actually liked. Laughter broke out, not unified, but contagious in its discomfort. Cash stood still, eyes forward, letting the noise arrange itself. From the corner of his vision, he caught one of the band members glance over. Not panic, calculation. The unspoken question musicians learn early. Are we still in this? The drummer eased his grip, sticks resting loosely against his palms, waiting for a cue that might never come. Behind the stage monitors, his manager raised a hand and tilted it downward. Not angry, practical. A small circular motion of the finger meant, wrap it up. They could pull him now, keep the night intact, avoid a headline nobody needed. It would even be framed as professionalism. Cash saw the gesture and didn't respond. Another whistle pierced through, sharper this time. It came from a man standing near the aisle, leaning forward with intent, fingers in his mouth, face lit with the satisfaction of being heard. That sound had weight. Cash registered it the way a boxer registers a particular punch, not as pain, but as information. He shifted his stance and leaned into the song again, but something changed. The tempo slowed, not dramatically, just enough to feel wrong if you were expecting momentum. The melody stretched. The band followed, uncertain at first, then obedient. Each note lingered longer than comfort allowed. The crowd didn't know how to interrupt that. The shouts continued, but they lost rhythm. A demand for something cheerful died halfway through. A joke landed flat. Noise without timing has no power, and slowly the room noticed the absence of structure. Cash reached the place where the next verse should have started. Instead, he stopped singing. No chord rang out. No explanation came. He didn't raise a hand or ask for patience. He simply stood there, guitar resting against him, eyes scanning neither defiantly nor apologetically, just present. The silence stretched longer than etiquette allowed, long enough for the whistlers to hesitate, long enough for the band to freeze, caught between readiness and restraint. Someone near the back clapped once, instinctively, then stopped. The dry microphone amplified everything he didn't say. The quiet exposed the room, made it impossible to pretend this was background entertainment. People shifted, unsure whether to double down or pull back. The man who'd whistled hardest lowered his hands, suddenly aware of how alone the sound had been. Cash felt the familiar pull toward escape. It would be easy to nod, turn, let the stage swallow him. He was tired enough for that choice to feel reasonable. He stayed. Not because it felt brave, because leaving, right now, would mean agreeing with the noise. He stepped away from the microphone. Not abruptly. Not to make a point. Just a single pace back. Enough for the stand to stop framing his face. The guitar came off his shoulder and rested against his leg. The strap still looped but slack, like something set down rather than removed. A few people thought this meant the end and shifted forward in their seats, ready for the transition to the next act. Cash took another step, closer to the edge of the stage. It was a small movement, but it changed the geometry of the room. Without the microphone between them, his voice would have to travel on its own. No amplification, no distance to hide behind. He looked out, not searching for approval, not scanning for allies. His eyes settled briefly on the aisle, on the man who had whistled with purpose, then moved on without emphasis. When he spoke, it wasn't louder than the noise had been before. Some songs don't work unless you let them finish. That was all. No lecture. No apology. The words landed plainly, almost casually, the way someone might explain a delay or a cracked cup. A few people laughed out of habit, but the sound didn't spread. It hovered and disappeared, unsupported. Cash turned back toward the band, lifted the guitar again, and nodded once. Not a command, an invitation. They came in softly, adjusting on instinct, stripping the sound down to its bones. He began a different song, not familiar to this kind of room. No chorus built for rescue. It carried the shape of a confession, without the relief of resolution. The tone was steady, unforced. He didn't push. He didn't slow to dramatize. He sang as if the song would exist, whether anyone stayed with it or not. The first few rows went quiet first, not because they were convinced, but because they were uncertain how to react. Someone smiled reflexively, then let it fade. A woman folded her hands together without realizing she'd done it. The air thickened, not with emotion, but with attention. Cash's voice, unprotected now, showed its edges, a slight roughness on the higher notes. Breath taken where it had to be taken. Nothing hidden. The song explained why he was there without explaining himself. It didn't ask to be liked. It simply stayed. Halfway through, someone near the side laughed again. Short, nervous, but it stopped when no one joined in. The moment passed without acknowledgement. The band kept playing, careful, restrained, as if any excess might break the spell that hadn't fully formed yet. Cash didn't look triumphant. He looked focused, almost withdrawn, like a man finishing a task he'd decided not to abandon. Each line fell where it fell. Each pause remained unfilled. By the time the song reached its final verse, the room no longer sounded restless. Not friendly, not converted. Just quiet in a way that hadn't existed 15 minutes earlier. And for the first time that night, no one whistled. He didn't acknowledge the quiet when it arrived. That would have turned it into a reward. And he wasn't offering rewards. He simply continued, voice low, phrasing almost conversational now, as if the song had slipped out of performance mode and into something closer to plain speech set to melody. The band adjusted around him. The drummer softened until the sticks barely kissed the skins. The bass stayed behind the beat, cautious. Nothing pushed forward. They were listening as closely as the audience was, watching his shoulders, the angle of his head, learning the new rules in real time. The whistles were gone. What remained was less comfortable. A nervous laugh surfaced near the middle of the crowd and vanished without response. Someone coughed too loudly and then seemed embarrassed by the sound. Chairs creaked as people shifted their weight, suddenly aware that every movement carried. Cash didn't keep his eyes fixed on the room. That would have felt like pressure. Instead, he sang mostly downward, toward the stage floor, then lifted his gaze at odd moments, not long, not challenging, just enough to check whether the thread was still intact. Each time he looked up, he met faces that were no longer braced for interruption, but hadn't yet decided what to do with themselves. Midway through the next song, something broke the pattern. A single clap. Not at the end. Not loud. One hand meeting the other once, reflexively, from somewhere off to the right. It startled people more than the earlier noise had. A few heads turned, irritated, then confused. No one joined in. The clap stood alone and then dissolved back into the song. Cash didn't react. He didn't pause. He didn't nod in thanks. He simply kept going, as if this too was just another sound passing through the room. He changed the set without announcing it. The next song was one he rarely played in rooms like this. Too exposed. Too tied to places and faces most audiences preferred to imagine from a safe distance. The kind of song that could empty a space if delivered wrong. The band hesitated for half a beat when he signaled it, then followed, trusting the direction even if they didn't fully understand the destination. The air shifted again. Not warmer, more precise. The man who had whistled earlier stood motionless now, hands at his sides, eyes fixed on the stage without the satisfaction he'd carried before. He wasn't converted. He was simply quiet. Cash felt the balance. Thin, unstable. He knew it could tip back at any second. One wrong inflection, one hint of sermon, and the spell would break. So he stayed restrained, letting the song do only what it was capable of doing on its own. In the spaces between lines, the room revealed itself. Fabric brushing against fabric, the dull thud of a foot adjusting, breath moving in and out in uneven rhythms. No one rushed to fill the gaps anymore. This wasn't acceptance. It was a tension, fragile and conditional. And Cash held it without trying to own it. He let the last chord fade on its own. No flourish. No gesture asking for a response. The sound thinned until it was gone, and the quiet that followed felt heavier than before, as if the room had learned how to listen and wasn't sure what came next. Cash cleared his throat once, lightly. Not into the microphone, just enough to reset his voice. "I'm not very good at guessing what people want," he said. The sentence was plain, almost awkward. No timing built into it. A few people smiled without meaning to, then stopped themselves. He didn't wait for that to settle. "I've tried," he added after a moment. "It didn't improve much." That was all he offered. No story arc, no redemption folded neatly at the end. Just a fact placed on the table and left there. The effect wasn't applause. It was stillness, dense, attentive. The kind that makes a room feel smaller, closer. People leaned forward slightly, not because they were invited to, but because something honest had been said without asking for anything in return. Cash looked down at his hands for a second, then back up. When he spoke again, his tone didn't change, but something underneath it did. Less guarded now, less formal. "There were nights," he continued, "when I got it wrong. Thought I was helping when I wasn't. Thought I knew who I was singing for." He stopped there. No lesson followed. He didn't name the mistakes. He didn't dress them up as stepping stones. He simply acknowledged them and let them exist without explanation. A woman in the front row nodded once, slowly, as if recognizing something she hadn't expected to hear in this place. Cash shifted the guitar slightly and rested his thumb on the strings, grounding himself before the next song. "This one's for anyone who didn't ask me to be here," he said, "including myself." The line wasn't a joke. It wasn't defiant. It landed quietly, like a door closing somewhere behind the room. The song that followed didn't argue its case. It moved carefully, shaped by restraint rather than release. It carried doubt without dramatizing it, responsibility without relief. The melody stayed narrow, refusing to swell into anything triumphant. In the first few rows, people began to nod. Not in time, not rhythmically, but thoughtfully, as if agreeing with a premise they hadn't known they shared. No one reached for their drink. No one spoke. Cash wasn't performing against the room anymore. He wasn't trying to bring it along. He stood within it, offering something unfinished and letting it remain that way. The tension didn't disappear. It changed form. What had been resistance became weight, something held rather than pushed away. The crowd hadn't become friendly. It had become human. And that, Cash knew, was as far as honesty ever really went. He didn't move when the song ended. The band waited, uncertain. The room waited too, suspended between what had just been said and whatever might follow. Cash stood with his hands resting on the guitar, not gripping it, not letting go either. The silence stretched, not awkward, not reverent, intentional. He lifted his head and looked toward the same section of the crowd where the night had first turned against him. Not dramatically. No narrowing of the eyes. Just a calm, direct look, like someone returning to a place they'd already been and found difficult. "I sing this way," he said evenly, "because it's the only way I know when I'm not pretending. No defense in it, no edge, just a statement of method." He paused, then added, "If I change that, the songs stop being true. And then they're not much use to anyone. Least of all me." He didn't wait to see how that landed. Cash nodded once to the band and began the song that had opened the night. The same one that had drawn the whistles. The same one that had nearly ended the set before it began. But it wasn't the same now. He lowered the key, stripped the arrangement until it barely existed. The drummer set the sticks down entirely. The bass dropped out after the first few bars. What remained was rhythm only where it was unavoidable. His voice carried the weight alone. The microphone was still dry, unforgiving. Every breath surfaced. Every slight hesitation became part of the shape. He didn't correct for it. He leaned into it, letting the spaces speak as loudly as the words. For a moment, the band didn't follow. Then, carefully, they did, touching the song instead of playing it. A note here, a shadow of harmony there. Nothing that would soften the core. The room locked in. No coughs now. No shifting. People sat perfectly still, as if movement might fracture something fragile. A man near the aisle clasped his hands together tightly, knuckles whitening without him noticing. Someone else lowered their head, not in reverence, but concentration. This was the risk. Cash knew it. If this failed, there would be no recovery. No clever ending to smooth it over. He wasn't rebuilding. He was repeating himself without armor. He didn't watch the crowd. He focused inward, measuring breath, letting the song move at its own pace. The words didn't ask for understanding. They simply existed, unprotected. When the final line ended, he didn't rush the silence that followed. It stayed. Not applause, not reaction. Just a held moment. Dense. Complete. The kind that doesn't belong to the performer or the audience alone. Cash remained still, eyes lowered, as if listening to something only he could hear. And for the first time that night, the room didn't ask him to be anything else. The silence ended on its own. Not with a cue, not with a signal from the stage, but with a sound that seemed to rise from the floor rather than the seats. One pair of hands met another. Then another. Uneven at first, cautious, as if the room were checking whether this response was allowed. The applause didn't surge. It accumulated. Cash didn't bow. He stayed where he was, shoulders loose, guitar still against his body, eyes lowered for a few seconds longer than custom dictated. When he finally looked up, he didn't scan the crowd for confirmation. He simply nodded once, small, almost private, like a man acknowledging another person across a table. The clapping spread backward through the hall. Not loud, not unified, but steady. The same section that had produced the whistles earlier joined in last, hands coming together without enthusiasm or irony. Just agreement. The man near the aisle clapped too, slower than the rest, his face unreadable, as if unsure what exactly he was responding to, but certain it deserved recognition. Cash stepped back toward the microphone and spoke briefly. No speech, no summary of what the night had meant. "Thank you for hearing me out," he said. That was it. He leaned toward the band and counted off a final song. Short, unadorned. Not about him. Not about applause or endurance. It carried a quiet sense of choice. The kind that doesn't resolve cleanly. The kind people live with rather than celebrate. The band played it straight. No extra color. No attempt to lift the room higher than it wanted to go. When it ended, Cash didn't wait for more. He nodded to the musicians, turned, and walked off at the same pace he'd walked on. No encore. No glance over his shoulder. The applause followed him part way, and then softened, like rain easing after a long spell. Backstage, the air felt thinner. His manager exhaled, a sound halfway between relief and disbelief. That, he said quietly, was the most dangerous moment of the tour. Cash set the guitar down carefully, as if it mattered how it landed. He wiped his hands on his jacket once. "They didn't owe me anything," he replied, "and I wasn't there to collect." He sat for a moment before standing again, letting the noise outside dissolve into memory. Somewhere beyond the walls, the festival moved on. Another act was announced. Another mood took hold. But for the people who stayed, who listened without being asked to, something had settled. Not excitement, not loyalty, respect. And that, Cash knew as he walked toward the quiet of the corridor, was the only ending worth leaving without trying to improve.